I think live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unleash Your Magic. Tonight, I am here with Kate. I'm so excited to have her. I have such good things to tell you about her. So, Kate is a psychotherapist at Transformation Counseling, which is in St. Louis, Missouri, for all of those of you who are in the U.S. listening to this. Kate is a psychotherapist in private practice, specializing in working with adult survivors of childhood trauma through the use of effective and experimental therapy. She is certified administrator, interpreter of the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I think that's interesting, and has extensive training in the Enneagram system of personality typing. Kate, you might have to tell us all about that, actually. Kate is a certified facilitator of the 3 Keys to Self-Understanding, a groundbreaking approach to deep emotional healing focused on restoring the mind, body, spirit connection, and has worked with this integrative and experiential healing approach for over 12 years. Geez. Kate is also trained in body-centered, I don't even know if I'm saying this word properly, but Gestalt. That's an interesting therapy form, the integrative psychotherapy training program of Kansas City. She works with clients both in the United States and internationally as well. In addition to her private counseling practice, Kate also teaches as graduate faculty in the counseling department at Webster University and facilitates group therapy for those interested in healing childhood and relationships trauma. My God, this woman, Kate, how did you manage to get all of this done? That's so amazing. I could go on all the things that you've done. That's so cool.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, it's a lot. It's something I enjoy doing, though, so it doesn't feel like a lot, if that makes any sense.
That's awesome. And I was reading through your profile. I know that there's more, that I could keep reading all the things that you have. Do you want to talk about more about all the things, or more about the one that you're interested most in? Like how do you get to pick such amazing programs? And
Sure, yeah. Well, when somebody says, hey, do you want to talk about what you do? I always get excited because I love everything that I do. I was saying earlier, I feel really grateful that I get to do this kind of work because it doesn't feel like work. So, a lot of other kinds of things that I work with is workshops and classes, and I'm actually in the process of creating some online classes, which I hope to have launched by the end of March, which will be sort of these online versions of the workshops I've done in persons with people around everything from visual journaling to, kind of the deep emotional healing work, just lots and lots of different kinds of things. So I really appreciate you having me on tonight. This is wonderful to get a chance to share with everybody.
Well, yeah, because when we first started talking, I was like really intrigued with your background and all your education and how you can help our audience, right? That's so amazing. Wow. I'm just like flabbergasted at all the things that, you can do and all the things you're interested in. There's such amazing accomplishments, actually.
Well, I was really excited when our paths crossed because it seems like we have kind of similar visions, I guess, in the sense of really helping people tap into that deeper place inside and find their aliveness again. I use the word aliveness, you use the word magic. It all means the same kind of thing.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I find that interesting how, like you said, we have the same things in common, but we call it different things. I find that so fascinating how you can attribute different words to the same meaning.
Yes.
And I'm sure that throughout this webinar, there are some words that you'll use, and then there are some words that I'll be like, oh, I say this instead, right? So that's super fascinating. I guess for the purpose of this webinar, we wanted to talk about emotional intelligence, right? I feel like that's your number one strength. So for those people that are listening, they're like, I know what emotions are. I know what intelligence is. What is that? How do you combine them? Or what does that emotional intelligence word mean? Like, give us a good idea of what you would tell people what it means.
Well, the simple answer is to being aware of what you're feeling in any given moment. It's a simple experience, but it's not always easy for most people because, so much of what I work with in my practice is helping people uncover and understand just unconsciously how they were supported emotionally as children, because those earliest experiences of support shape our relationships the rest of our lifetime.
Yeah.
So, when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's the ability to be able to tap into a feeling, what it means, where it's at in your body. The important thing about feelings is that they bring information to us. They bring information about our needs. So someone who's an emotionally intelligent person is able to understand what's happening in themselves at any given time, or at the very least be able to tap into the need that's present around any feeling that shows up. So being able to be aware of your feelings and understand what they're telling you about what you need is really the way I see emotional intelligence. It's called lots and lots of different things. Some people call it consciousness, some people call it wisdom, some people call it emotional intelligence. We're all talking about the same kinds of things. You have to just pick a word,
So if I'm thinking back at my journey, so I have a bit of an anxious background. My family has a lot of anxiety, medication. Like, I was told by the doctors that it was genetic, right? So I'm putting myself back into that situation of being anxious, and I'd be like, Kate, I know what emotional intelligence is. I follow my feelings all the time. I feel anxiety all the goddamn time. What are you talking about? How? But that isn't it. Emotional intelligence isn't that. It's not just knowing that I have anxiety. What else do you need to incorporate into that for you to have emotional intelligence?
That's a great question. So, one of the things that's true about life is that we have feelings around every single experience that happens to us. Sometimes we're really aware of the feelings, and most of the time we're not aware of the feelings, or at least the deeper ones that seem to create or bubble up into these things like depression or anxiety or panic attacks or addictions and those kinds of things. So, it's one thing to know about what we're feeling, but knowing about a feeling in a cerebral kind of way is very, very different than being able to drop into the feeling and know it in a more body-centered, experiential kind of way. Because, the thing that keeps us stuck most in life is that we don't have the supports to really drop in and feel in our bodies the feeling. Most people, when you say the word anxiety, most people tell you, oh, let me tell you about my anxiety. We're unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, however you look at it, as a culture, as a world, we're very aware of what anxiety feels like. Now, those people who have enough supports to stay with the anxiety, deepen into it, move through it, and come out on the other side of it are people generally who can find a lot of satisfaction, because on the other side of every feeling is our need. It's a need about what do we need in that given moment. So anxiety in some ways is there to get our attention, to either tell us about something we need more of, something we need less of. And that doesn't happen in a cerebral kind of way. When we're working from our brain in terms of trying to understand what we need, or understand in our brain what a feeling is trying to indicate for us, we're really missing that deeper wisdom that exists in a place that's beyond words. It's really about a true, deeper need for some kind of support that we just don't have yet. So thinking about feelings is very different than feeling feelings. Most people will say, oh yeah, I feel angry. And you say, you ask them to just describe that for me, or I feel anxious, and it will describe that for me, and they have a hard time describing that. It's more these concepts and sort of thing. So what I really see as deeply transformational is being able to help people build the supports inside to stay with the feelings, all of them, the ones we deem pleasant, the ones we deem not so pleasant, because on the other side of our feeling is our experience of need. And that's where satisfaction in our life comes from.
That's so interesting. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we're like, I'd say, I don't know if I want to say programmed, but we're almost like,
good word.
We're programmed to think from the cerebral part versus our
Yes.
soul or our gut part. I wonder
Yes.
why that is.
Well, so let me give you an example. One of the things I love to share with my clients, and it's really helpful for me to remember at times as well too, is that most of our angst, most of our distress in life is not because of what we're feeling. It happens because of how we feel about what we're feeling. And that's the part of it that's unconscious. That's the part of it that is deeper than words. It exists in a place that our brain cannot get us to, no matter how hard we try or scrunch our face up like that. We can never get to that place with our brain. So our happiness or satisfaction or our dissatisfaction or unhappiness is never really about what we're feeling. It's about how we feel about what we're feeling. And so as I work with clients and we work together in therapy, it's about being able to decode what's happening in our bodies, what's happening unconsciously, and build that consciousness. Carl Jung said once that the way to more satisfaction in life is to build consciousness, and awareness around what's happening. So when we think about our brain and we think about our body, our brain is, granted, we live in a left brain world, so we do need our brain. I'm not sitting here saying that we don't need our brain. The problem is, like you mentioned, we tend to over rely on our brain when it comes to emotional experiences.
Yeah.
But our brain is actually a very important piece of emotional safety for many, many, many people. When we're in our head, we're in our brain, we can't be in our body.
I agree.
So if we're up in our head and up in our brain, we're not in our body, then I guarantee you we're not going to be feeling the actual feeling that's happening in our body. So our brain becomes almost like an escape valve when we don't have any other options. The feeling that's coming up inside is too much. It's too overwhelming. We don't have the emotional supports to process and move through it. Then moving up into our brain and trying to figure it out is a safe alternative. And when I talk about safe, I use that word in a very different way in my practice. Safety doesn't always mean satisfaction. Safety can be simply numbing out or getting relief. But what it does is it at least distracts us long enough that we can move away from the experience far enough to not have to feel it. So being in our brain, not only do we live in a really heavily tilted left brain world, but it's a form of emotional safety for many, many people. Yeah. And in particular, speaking about the Enneagram, many Enneagram types, or I should say some of the Enneagram types, tend to be more heady in terms of safety as well. So there's a lot of variables that go into why a person might be very cerebral and heavily relying on the brain when it comes to feelings, and lots of pieces to that, which is one of the fascinating things about the work that I get to do with people is sort of creating that puzzle, finding the picture and helping people recover back more of their aliveness. So as a long answer to a very short question, why do we use our brain? So, yes.
No, I think that's great. You're saying it in such simple terms, which really helps anyone who's never really studied psychology. Like, you would probably explain to me in a psychologist way, and I would understand because I went to school a little bit before that, right? But not everyone has had the chance to do that education or really has had the time to research any of this, right? So if we're looking at the Enneagram, I know, like, I have an idea of what it is. I know sort of, how many types is there again?
There's 9 types.
9 types. Then no, I don't think I've ever, how are you able to discern people by which Enneagram by just kind of talking to them, or do they really need to go through a test?
Yes, so that's a great question, and it's a big sort of topic of discussion in the Enneagram community and really kind of the personality typology community in general. The way I was trained in the Enneagram, the way I use it personally, the way I use it in my practice is a little bit different than what a lot of the mainstream Enneagram world believes. The way and to kind of talk a little bit about the Enneagram, I need to talk just a piece about the Myers-Briggs too, because I use those in very close proximity with each other in my practice. So the Myers-Briggs, most people, when you say that, they have some familiarity with it, whether they took it in a psychology class or for a job one day or something like that. But a lot of times when you speak about the Enneagram, people aren't quite as familiar with that, and there's reasons for that. The Myers-Briggs has been around for a while. It's a very heavily researched, validated, kind of quantified tool. There's reliable tests, so you could go online, you could, through the qualified places, you could take your Myers-Briggs online, and provided it was done with a qualified person and they validated results and all that good stuff, you can pretty accurately have a sense of your Myers-Briggs. Now, the Enneagram isn't nearly as widely known, but it's similar in that both these tools are personality sorters, personality sorters. They're not assessments. They're not, tests or anything like that. They just sort people into different types. And so the Myers-Briggs, the way that I use that in my practice is that it gives us a picture of a person's spirit, their soul, their essence, whatever word again you want to use is fine because it's all talking about the same thing. That innermost place of wisdom that's deeper than words, that really has a sense of what would feed us and what doesn't.
Yeah.
The Enneagram I use in my practice in a little bit different way, like I said, than mainstream Enneagram society. So mainstream Enneagram culture, like the Myers-Briggs culture, they both believe they've cornered the market and their tool itself can explain all facets of a person and here's the only thing you need. I tend to disagree. I feel like the Myers-Briggs gives us a really good jumping off place for beginning to get a sense of what a person's spirit was designed to be, way back before the world got a hold of them and started telling them who to be and how to be and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
The Enneagram, on the other hand, I believe gives us a very, very good jumping off place for a person's defensive structure. So basically their defense system, for those people in psychology are familiar with that term.
Yeah.
The Enneagram gives us a very good sense of sort of what we do when our backs are against the wall, so to speak, emotionally, and we just got to find a way out of it, So in that sense, the Myers-Briggs is about life and living, and what kinds of things make me happy and satisfied. And the Enneagram is more about how do I protect when I'm in emotional distress. And to be honest with you, for the most part, when a client comes to me and starts working with me, neither part of themselves in this regard is too conscious to them yet.
Yeah.
It's sort of a fight or flight kind of thing, and our Enneagram kicks in, or as you were talking about, kind of your passion and what feeds you and that kind of thing. That's much more connected to the Myers-Briggs type. So it's a little bit of an out-of-the-box approach to using these tools. Separately, these tools are incredibly important and powerful, wonderful pieces of information, but you put them together and they just blow the charts off. They're so rich, and they give us a sense of, and some people say, well, why is that important? And it's important because the way we start to build consciousness is to be able to start to understand when we're in our center, when we're operating out of our spirit, and when we're not. And it's not always as obvious as we'd like to think.
No.
Most cases, if we're not in our body and we're working out of our head, there's a decent chance we're probably not in a lot of contact with our spirit. I mean, not always. So it's one of the places that I often jump off with a client when we begin to work together, because it gives us a sense of kind of who we're going back to recover, who we're going back to dig out, and all the little skills and tactics and things that we learn along the way to protect that most vulnerable part inside of us. So, I've presented both places, and Myers-Briggs and Enneagram, and it's fascinating to me, and I mean, no disrespect to any of either communities, but it's fascinating to me as I see people walking around just kind of with one half of the picture here, because I tell you, I was at the International Association for Psychological Type several years back presenting, and people were walking around, declaring their Myers-Briggs type and everything. And I'm sitting there going, no, you're not an extrovert. You've got an extroverted defense part. You've got an extroverted Enneagram. So it feels like that because you're operating out of defense mode most of the times. But it saddens me sometimes that they aren't more open to each other, because when you put these two things together, it just is amazing.
Wow.
Lots of light bulb moments.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Like you said, Myers-Briggs is a mouthful to say.
Right, 10 times fast.
Let's not try that. But it is very, I'm familiar with it, but to explain what it is, All I know is a personality type. Now that you've described it a little bit more clearly, I understand more, but it's true that Enneagram is not something that we hear. And it's strange why society, like you said, favors one over the other when we could use all of these programs in conjunction together and get a bigger picture of what is going on in your system, right?
Yes. You know, and the funny little, I'm sorry, the funny little piece about the Enneagram is that it's been around a lot longer than the Myers-Briggs. It's traced back to the Sufis and the mystics, and it's much more of a right brain, mystical kind of tool, and it's handed down anecdotally. So there aren't any tests or quizzes or online assessments or anything that are validated and reliable that a person could actually go on, take their Enneagram, and come away having true type. So it's, you know, despite what people think and say and claim, it's an anecdotal tool. It's a qualitative kind of instrument. So it hasn't been quantified. And that's one of the things I probably see the most in my practice with people who do come in familiar with the Enneagram is that oftentimes it's mistyped because these online kinds of things are misleading. In part too, because there's never any follow-up. So there's never any discussion or validating or which you have to do in order to be able to even, you know, verify types. So yeah, but the Enneagram's an ancient tool, and it's much more right brain. It's much more mystical, which again, we don't live in a world that, you know, highly values that yet. Yeah. We're working on that. We're working on that.
Yeah. Yes. In your experience, do you see, how am I going to phrase this? Like, so we all have a different personality. Kind of, if you're looking at the Enneagram, no one is the same, right? But do you see some correlation in between emotional intelligence and certain personalities or certain types of people? Or is it really maybe these people that have more emotional intelligence are like actively choosing to have it, or is it more back ingrained into a personality?
That's a great question. You know, so both. Let me explain. Probably more inherent, I would say, in some cases. You know, so when we talk about Myers-Briggs, you know, there's the temperament types, and without getting into a lot of the Myers-Briggs theory because it's not really important for the understanding, certain temperament types are drawn to certain kinds of things as sort of their underlying motivating factor in the world. Okay, so for example, sensing perceivers. You know, they're very focused on fun and freedom.
Okay.
Excuse me. So that's kind of this underlying unconscious motivation is fun and freedom. Okay. Sensing judgers, they tend to be more motivated, driven by sort of rules and regulation, kind of, you know, organizing in that sense, but deep underlying motivation. Intuitive thinkers tend to be more driven towards and motivated by mastery and competence, and intuitive feelers they tend to be more driven and motivated by depth and meaning, authenticity. Okay. So for that reason, and I do just think some of this is because we're drawn to the things that feed us. There's a lot of intuitive feelers who not only are very adept at emotional intelligence and things, because that's or let me say more wired for that kind of thing, let me say, because it's sort of in their DNA, you know, is depth, meaning, authenticity, whereas say an intuitive thinker, no, those things might be nice, but they're more motivated and fed by mastery and competence and knowledge and those kinds of things. So even though they can sound similar, they're different. There's distinct differences. You know, again, it would be someone who might be more cerebral about emotions versus someone who says, oh no, I know about my emotions in a deep way. Just different in personality types, differences. That's all it is. One isn't better or one isn't worse. It's just different. I do think that often, you know, because I've asked this question a lot too, that I do get a lot of intuitive feelers who find me for therapy, and it kind of makes sense. You know, if I liked race cars, I'd meet a lot of other race car friends at the racetracks because that's what I like. So there are some types that are more structured towards things like emotions, feelings, emotional intelligence, consciousness, awareness, more so than other people. But that doesn't mean other people aren't capable of it either. It just might take a little more oomph, a little more focus, a little more impotence than it would for someone who that's just a natural inclination, just because even if they had gotten no support or very little satisfying support emotionally as a child, they'd still be wired towards that, kind of like a fish is wired towards the water. So that's a great question. I believe everybody's capable of it. It just some about type and temperament, some does make a difference. We talk about the Enneagram. There are some Enneagram types that are I wouldn't say necessarily wired towards more emotions, because the Enneagram isn't really about that part of us. It's more about defending our vulnerability. But there are some types who are wired more cerebrally. So you might find them, poking around in the psychology books and the workshops. And, I always kind of talk about healing as these different layers of healing. And, kind of that uppermost layer is the information gathering piece. And oftentimes where a lot of people get stuck in their life because they just don't have enough supports to deepen another piece. So it's kind of both. There are some types that are wired for that, some defensive types that are wired more towards kind of not failing or kind of knowing a lot of stuff as a way of protecting emotionally. And so when those right combinations come together, you'll see a lot of those in the classes and the workshops and the groups and those kinds of things. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. And it makes me think further, because so we're talking about personalities and emotional intelligence, but I deal with a lot of people with anxiety, right? That's my strong suit. And that's really the meat and potatoes of just my business and what my mission is, right? And I wonder if this is also applicable for the anxiety world, right? So looking at the Myers-Briggs and looking at the Enneagram, is there some personalities that are almost more prone to either having anxiety or being able to let go of their anxiety? Or I feel like I know what the answer to this is, because it's going to be relatable to what you just said, right? But I'd love to hear it in your terms.
Sure, absolutely. It's a great question. I love talking about this stuff. I will start just simply by saying that nobody follows the formula. These are the things that I've seen, and these are the things that I've learned, and the things that I know and experience. When you think about, for example, someone like an intuitive feeler who is wired to feel things deeply,
yeah,
there's a decent chance that they're going to have more anxiety or feel it more, or even be more aware of it, than someone who may not have that same temperament type, just because of the way they're wired. So I see this a lot in couples where, one might be an intuitive feeler and their partner might be a sensing perceiver, or someone who just has sort of different marching orders inside. And it's nothing about not wanting to connect or not. It's just their attention is focused towards other things. So it has to be a little more intentional for them, because it's not a preferred way of operating in the world. So, for example, introverts, an introverted intuitive feeler, pretty good chance that they're going to have anxiety. And again, not across the board. There's plenty of introverted feelers who don't have anxiety, but there are some types and some personality types who are going to be drawn to feeling things more deeply, being aware of things more deeply. I was a teacher for many years before I became a therapist, and worked with kids of all ages, little bitty preschool kids all the way up to high school and graduate students, everything. And one of the things that I have consistently seen throughout my experiences with what I've done professionally is a lot of times kids who have kids who are very intelligent will have a lot of anxiety as well, because they're putting things together. They're 3 or 4 paces down the road before the rest of their peers are, or and it doesn't mean it's certain kinds of intelligences. They already know where this thing's going to go. So there are patterns, there are themes, but more than anything else, I think it's so important to help a person understand who they are and how they're put together, and their strengths and their growth areas, and the things they do to protect, and all of those. that's to me, you know, I have clients often who come in and they go, okay, Kate, you know, what's the best combination here? And I say, there really isn't one. You know, it's about knowing who you are and what you're working with and how to support yourself in that process. So yeah, I see patterns, I see parallels. I always like to kind of hold them as hypotheses, or, you know, kind of experiments, and we'll see if this really happens or plays out. And very often I share things like that with clients, because, you know, I always like to say, so I got some experience doing this counseling thing, but they've got all the experience about themselves. So we have to work together. We have to. It has to be a collaboration, or it's not going to go anywhere.
I totally agree. That's insane. I never thought about it that way, but it is true though. Like kids today, I feel like it's either we're talking about it more in society, or either they just have more anxiety.
You
And I
know,
find
it's
it so crazy, right?
yeah. So I love that. I'm glad you said I want to jump in here, because, you know, this happens a lot in my practice. I'll get clients who, you know, come and they start working, and, you know, we're working together, and, you know, 3-4 months, 5 months in, they're going, you know, Kate, I just don't think this is working. I'm feeling more anxiety now, or I'm feeling more depressed now. And, you know, my answer, and this is true. This is true for everybody, myself, everybody, is it's not that they're more anxious now or more depressed now. It's that they have more consciousness of how anxious or depressed they've always been.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of what needs to happen if we're ever going to move through it and get to the other side. And so I think there's a little bit of that happening in our world, where mental health, emotional intelligence, things like that, they don't carry quite the same stigma as they used to. There's still a lot of work to be done in terms of really making space for that in the world. But I think that it's a little safer now to talk about these things. So I don't necessarily believe that people are more anxious now. I just think it's a little more acceptable to talk about it and to own it and to share it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm torn on the subject. So sometimes, some days I'm like, because some days I'm like, oh, it's sort of society that's like not doing this to us, but is creating a lot of anxiety with social media and all of these things. But sometimes I'm like, maybe it's because we're just more conscious, and then I just stop thinking about it, because we'll never truly get we'll never get a real, you know, answer to our question. But it's good to see different perspectives, especially from you, who's dealt with from small to adult, right? And you've seen this throughout your life. So it's a great perspective to have. So leading into my next question, I feel like it also correlates, but like looking at why it's important to have emotional intelligence. And I feel like if you have more emotional intelligence, then the anxiety and the depression can finally start to heal in a way, right?
Yes. I mean, that's it in a nutshell, you know? The more we're aware of what's happening and why it's happening, what it means, what it represents, the more satisfaction we're going to be able to work towards in our lives. And so why does it matter to have greater emotional intelligence or awareness or consciousness? Is because we're all walking around just trying to survive and manage our feelings, as opposed to being with our feelings and learning from them. You know, if we had even 10% more support inside to really know what's happening, to have that emotional intelligence, to have that emotional awareness, to have the supports to be able to say, gosh, I feel terrified right now. I wonder what that's about, you know, and we look around and we go, okay, there's not a bear about to eat me. So this has to be old fear, you know.
Yeah.
I wonder what I need. And we can stay with it and we can breathe through that. Then our need becomes organically evident to us. It's not even a brain thing. Our brain is so far out of that equation. Then we need our brain to maybe help us get that need met. Yeah. But knowing what we need never comes from our brain. It comes from the other side of a feeling, which happens down here in our body. So to kind of go back to your last question about anxiety and all of that, I 100% do agree that the way our society is moving with all of the technology and all of the, you know, social media, just all the things that are going on in our world, that it absolutely has the capacity to feed anxiety. but in most cases, the anxiety is already there. So it's like, it's not that it doesn't add to it or aggravate it. I always tell clients, I say, gosh, if you walk in a situation or you have an interaction with a person and all of a sudden you're feeling something significant, that's not probably the first time you've ever felt that. That's just whatever's happening in that exchange or in that situation or that experience is drumming up old fear or old anxiety or old anger or sadness or heartbreak. It's I kind of like to talk about an outside job versus an inside job. Yeah. So absolutely, sometimes things in our outside world aggravates an experience that we're already having inside. And that's one of the things I think that's really a challenge about technology is it's wonderful things that technology can do for us. We can do things like this. We can connect. I do a lot of distance therapy with clients who want this kind of work, but they just can't get to St. Louis. And so there's just amazing things technology can do. On the flip side, how many people walk next door and ask to borrow an egg? We text, how many people actually phone their friend and say, gosh, I just missed hearing your voice. I just needed to connect with your voice. And we don't do that stuff anymore. And that absolutely creates disconnection, which also touches anxiety inside of us. We are a social species. We are wired to connect. So anything that competes with that innate desire and wiring to connect there's going to be a burn-off. There's going to be a rub. And that's oftentimes comes out as anxiety or depression or addiction. So, yeah.
It's so interesting. Like, it's true though. We don't call our neighbors, or we don't just go knock at the door, see if they have anything, or we don't just call up our friends, see how they're doing. Like, we're using our thumbs. I think our thumb muscles are really active.
Right.
But it's true. Like, I feel also like people that have anxiety, in my experience, almost avoid that social interaction. And that, I feel like that social interaction can actually break a bit of the cycle, right? Of like, if you're having panic attacks. So my experience is I had panic attacks every time I was alone. There was this deep fear of being alone. I don't know, now I know where it comes from, but back then I didn't. And I isolated myself and put myself exactly in those situations that would put me alone versus going to see a friend and be like, hey, we need to break this cycle because this is what's going on. And like you said, we're social beings, right? We need to connect. But people that have a lot of anxiety or depressed tend to go the opposite way. Instead of going towards the connection and towards the help, they go the other way.
Yes. And there's good reasons for that.
You want to explain? I'm
sure. I would love to. I thought you would never ask. So anxiety is about safety sometimes. So, someone who has anxiety or says, hey, I want to connect, but I'm having a panic attack about just even thinking about going out and having coffee with my friend or whatever that is kind of thing, phobias or a similar kind of thing. Yeah. It's like the level of anxiety that's coming up, or the phobia, the level of the phobic experience that's coming up is safer for them to tolerate than what they would have to feel if they were to move through that and reach out for connection and then have to feel everything that's going to come up when that happens. So it sounds a little upside down sometimes, but anxiety, depression is about emotional safety. One of the big things I work so hard in my practice with clients is about learning about how we all create emotional safety. And sometimes the way we create emotional safety is very satisfying. Say when we're lonely and we reach out to a friend or call somebody and we feel that connection and we go, oh, okay, that feels really good. And sometimes the way we do safety doesn't feel as satisfying. We take a drink or we go spend a bunch of money or work longer or, whatever our shtick is, because everybody's got one, right? Yeah. And so a big part of what we have to learn to do, in my opinion at least, is to start to build support for all of the ways we create emotional safety. So when I'm working with clients who say might be agoraphobic or have an addiction or whatever that is, You know, a large part of our work is beginning to build compassion and space for this is safety. Yes, it doesn't make sense to your rational, logical brain, but we have to put that out of the equation.
Yeah.
This is about if you were to reach out and make connection right now, the feelings that would come up, and I'm talking in the unconscious place, and this is where emotional intelligence, emotional awareness helps us out. The more conscious we can become, the more support we build, we can move through that. But before we have that, it would be too much for us to reach out and take in connection, because when we take in something, it's going to energize any unmet need around that. Okay. So, and this stuff happens unconsciously. And that's why we have to build our emotional awareness and intelligence, because without consciousness of that, we quit reaching. We move away from pain instead of toward it and through. You know, moving away from pain was a wonderful strategy, you know, when we were being chased by saber-toothed tigers and things like that. It doesn't work when it comes to emotions if we ever want to feel truly alive. If we want to feel truly alive, we have to be able to lean into our feelings and experiences, all of them, and not away from them. And that takes some time. That takes work, because most of us don't get wired to do that. You know, when we're small, we hear things like, okay, you've cried long enough, let's stop that. Or, you know, you better wipe that smile off your face before I knock it. Whatever it is we hear, we don't get the support that says, oh, you're afraid. Let's work with that.
Yeah, that's very true. It's interesting. I love the part where you said anxiety or depression is a form of safety. And I think a lot of people that are in that situation, I know that when I was there 5 years ago, it didn't feel that way, right? It didn't feel like safety. But soon after, I started realizing that I was so used to being alone that was safety for me, and that being not alone or being in a group, then that was something new. That was a challenge. So I didn't want to be in that position, right? So it's really interesting that you say that. If we're looking at emotional intelligence, anxiety, I know that we talked previously about guided imagery programs, or the program that you created. I'm assuming you created that program, right? Okay. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Sorry, guys, we're having a little interruption here. I cannot hear Kate if she's talking, or she probably can't hear me, actually.
So you can hear me. Okay. That's great.
I will be typing out the questions.
Maybe we can chat. Maybe you can type in the chat. That sounds great.
Okay, let's talk. This is technology, guys. As you can see, I'm totally oblivious and just not equipped with technology. Okay, so let's talk about guided imagery program. Does that help with emotional intelligence?
One of the wonderful things about guided imagery, let me just see if she can hear me. One of the wonderful things about guided imagery is that, okay, great, she can hear me. So one of the wonderful things about guided imagery is that it allows us to tap into our unconsciousness. Okay, so our spirit, our soul, that innermost, deepest place of wisdom inside is all about anything but language. So when we think about guided imagery, it's pictures, it's images. Everybody does imagery in different ways, which we can talk about here in a minute. But it is the direct highway into our unconsciousness and into our spirit, basically into our feelings. So by the time we're even aware in our brain of a feeling and what that feeling might actually be, it's already been presenting as body sensation, images, etc. And so one of the powerful things about guided imagery is that it's a tool I use a lot, is that it can help us heal old unfinished wounds that we just didn't get a chance to ever process and move out of ourselves. It's like the power of a dream. Have you ever had a dream where you've woken up from the dream and you're, I'm glad that bear isn't there, and it really felt real? Well, that's what's so wonderful about guided imagery is our brain our mind, our bodies cannot distinguish between imagery and something that is actually really happening. If we all were to close our eyes right now and I could lead you through an imagery practice around a lemon and all of that kind of thing, if you were measured or wired up to electrodes and all that kind of thing, your body would have a physiological response. So since feelings happen in our body and sensations are one of the ways that our body talks to us, imagery is a really powerful tool to get us down into that deeper place inside where we need to go if we're ever going to heal. So absolutely, yes, guided imagery is so powerful and absolutely helps with emotional intelligence, building awareness, building consciousness.
So is it something that you can do at home for everyone that's listening, or is it really something that you need special schooling, training to do? For those of you who are listening right now,
that's a great question. So imagery, anybody can do imagery. In fact, most of us do imagery all the time. If you're ever at a stoplight and you're imagining your evening at home in your fuzzy pajamas and your good book or whatever, you're doing imagery. So imagery is something that's actually very innate to us as humans. When you think about little kids, what's the first thing they do? They draw pictures. Right? They don't draw words. They don't start spelling supercalifragilistic. It's pictures. It's pictures of things and scribbles and images. So it is something that's innate to us. It's something that resonates. If you are somebody who loves movies, that's probably a pretty good chance that imagery is going to be something that you take to as well. There aren't really any sort of special schooling or training kinds of programs out there for imagery work. Really, the best way to do it and to learn how to do it is to start using it yourself personally. I'm actually teaching a graduate class this term at the university, and the topic for the class is creativity and counseling. And one of the weeks I teach about guided imagery. It's something I use all the time in my practice. It's something I use personally all the time. And the way I learned to do it and got pretty good at it, I think, is because I just started listening to imageries and really using it. I've been fortunate to have worked with a lot of teachers and trainers who it's just part of our approach, this integrative psychotherapy program in Kansas City, the body-centered Gestalt work, the 3 keys to understanding. All of these are sort of training programs in which imagery was wrapped in. In fact, I have a guided imagery program that I've written and produced. It's called Soul Meditations, Building Relationship That Lasts, and it's a guided journey inside. It's a 2-disc program. For those people who are old school, I still sell them in the actual CD versions, and you can also download it digitally off of my website. And it's a guided imagery program that is designed to help people deepen their emotional intelligence and tap back into that deeper place inside. So for those people who would be interested in guided imagery or its benefits or how it works, I'd encourage you to go check it out. It's $30 to download the whole album, or you can buy the tracks individually as well, because that's really the best way to jump in and start understanding how it works and why it works and what works for you, because everybody kind of like pitch and singing. Everybody's going to have a different style of imaging. Some people get very distinct images and deep sensation body experiences, and others just have more of a vague sense.
So do you think it's like meditating?
Similar to meditate. Guided imagery is similar to meditating. It's in the sense that you go in and kind of lose track of the outside world. What makes it different, and there's lots and lots of different forms of imagery, but guided imagery is more of a guided process or a narrated process, whereas meditation in many cases is about kind of clearing everything out in mindfulness and just sort of being in that moment. Guided imagery is more about an experience of some kind or a journey. You know, one of the things I love to share with my clients and anybody really, students, myself, friends, is you can't do imagery wrong. In fact, it's one of my favorite parts of my work, I think, personally and professionally. And so for anybody who'd be interested in learning more about it, I'd be happy to share with you. You can send me an email or join my Facebook group. I actually have on Facebook, Visual Journaling, Expanding Your Emotional Intelligence Facebook group that would love to have you come and join the community, and you can learn lots more about it there.
That's awesome. Thank you. Wow. This is very difficult, guys, to type to type to Kate and let her answer.
Yeah, imagery is a powerful thing. It's a wonderful thing. I, in fact, encourage us to get kids started in it right away. They're perfect candidates for it. I mean, they already imagine everything. So what if instead of chasing that imagination away, and instead, as a society, as a world, as a culture, we encouraged it, be a very different place we'd live.
I definitely agree. It's crazy how our world is today and how we're programmed to almost stop imagining and stop dreaming, right? Is there another tool that will increase your emotional intelligence?
That's a good question. Are there other tools to increase emotional intelligence? Well, I'm very biased. I mean, I'm a therapist, so I encourage everybody to be in therapy. I talk about therapy as kind of similar to like a vitamin. If we only took vitamins when we were starting to get sick, they'd help to some extent, but they're not going to be nearly as helpful or powerful than if we were taking our vitamins systematically all along the way and building up our immune system. So I'm a firm believer in people being in therapy. Even if it doesn't feel like your world is crashing around you, being able to deepen into and learn about and decode yourself is what emotional intelligence is all about. So like I tell my students, like I tell myself, the best way to do it is to dive in. The best way to become more emotionally intelligent is to do it, to dive in and learn about all the things you don't know about yourself yet. Again, the guided imagery is a wonderful kind of thing. I guess it really kind of depends on what level of emotional intelligence a person wants, because there's certainly the surface level of healing, which is building awareness and gathering information. And, sometimes that looks like going to classes and workshops and things like that. Kind of another layer is sort of this behavioral change, where perhaps we take some of the things that we've learned and we start to apply them to our life and maybe see some changes, in the outside world and that kind of thing. And then there's sort of this deeper layer that comes next, where it's this deeper level of emotional healing, where time and time and time again, we bypass the brain, we bypass all the knowledge, and we really dive into the experience of what's happening inside and deepening that emotional intelligence. And every time, I mean, it's certainly not a goal, but it's almost always an outcome, is a deeper sense of being connected to spirit. And that's really what true emotional intelligence is all about, is being so deeply connected to one's spirit and one's aliveness and one's essence that they can know at any given time what something is indicating or what they need. And in the moments where it's just not yet clear, they have the supports to be able to stay with themselves in that place. Good question.
Thank you. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's great. So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Stephanie, for inviting me to be on your program. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. In fact, it's hard to even believe that the hour is almost up. I could talk on and on and on and on about this work. It's my passion, and I'm just very grateful for you to you for giving me a chance to share about it. So just to share a little bit about some of the things that I do and have going on right now is, first of all, you know about my website, or some of you do. If not, if you haven't checked it out, you can check it out at www.kateschroederlpc.com. So that is, again, for those of you, I'll put it in the chat box here. And you pretty much from there you can get information about all of these sorts of things. But that's my website. I also, like I said, I have the guided imagery program that I wrote called Soul Meditations, Building a Relationship That Lasts. And it's a guided imagery program inside. You can also buy that if you're interested individually, as individual tracks or as the program altogether. I also have a Facebook group called Visual Journaling, Expanding Your Emotional Intelligence, which is a closed group. Anybody is welcome to join. I do ask that you answer a few questions. It just helps me get a sense of what you're looking for in terms of support, and kind of give you those things that you need. So for those of you who are interested in that kind of community, it's a very private and safe community where confidentiality is highly valued and stressed, and lots of supports and exercises and imagery workshops. And then the last thing that I would just share with you today is that I will be launching my class, one of my first online classes, March 30th, called Visual Journaling, Using Images to Go Deeper Than Words. And it's about helping people learn how to move beyond their thoughts and words and down deeper into their feelings and intuition, which is where emotional intelligence exists. And it's all about, even if you can't draw, so you don't have to be an artist to do this. It's about really starting to learn how to connect in that deeper place. And so that'll be launching March 30th. And for those of you who are interested in signing up for the class, there is a early bird pricing right now that will finish March 1st. So I put the link in here as well. I'd love to see you in that group too. So those are the things I have going on. Certainly feel free to check my website. I often post different kinds of workshops and things. And I do distance therapy and coaching for clients who might be interested in that. So thanks.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing, Kate. I'll definitely put all of those into the page. I'll lay them all out. Kate, send them to me on Messenger, and I'll be able to share those with you guys, definitely. And for those watching the replay, it's in the group and everything. So last question, what is the one thing you wish people asked you more?
That's a great question. What is the one thing that I wish people asked me more? Gosh, that's a wonderful question. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I think first what comes to mind is something around wanting to know how they can get involved and deepen into their awareness. But let me sit with that for a minute. That's a great question. Something that I wished people asked me more. I think here's what it would be. The question that I wish people would ask me more, ask more about is probably about how do they get back to more of their aliveness? How do they bring more of this into their life? How can they really deepen into their awareness? I think one of my most favorite phone calls I get is when I get a call from a parent who says, hey, my kid's having some issues, would you be open to doing therapy with them? And simply because I don't work with children for just a variety of different reasons, not that I don't think that they need good support, they certainly do. But almost always my answer immediately to the parent is, no, I won't work with your kiddo, but I will work with you. And here's why. Your kid is responding, reacting to something going on in the environment. So if you, as their parent, gets a handle on what's going on inside of you, their issues will sort themselves out organically. So that might be the question is, I wish I would hear from more parents about how do I be a better parent to my kid? Because that's really, truly how we're going to change the world. It's working with the generation that's to come. It's a great question.
So I'm writing to Kate right now and telling her, I just love that answer, right? It's true. It's up to the future generations, to the leaders, to the parents to really help the future generation to become better version of themselves and to really expand in their emotional intelligence, and they'll be the one that will change the world, right? So I want to thank you, Kate, for being on the show. I loved every minute of it. Oh, answer. Or am I typing?
Thank you. I really appreciate so much the opportunity to be on here to share a little bit more about the work that I do. And thank you for doing the work that you do. That's how we're going to change the world. You know, one person at a time, each of us following our aliveness. So I am grateful for being on the show. I'm grateful for your work and your passion. And I really, yeah, that's all I think I have right now. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate, for being on the show tonight. And if you guys want to reach her or talk to her, I'll put the links in the comments and in the page as well. And I will see you guys in 2 weeks for the new episode of Unleash Your Magic.